Hey there guys, my name is Clement from the Tech, and in this video I'm going to be showing you guys all about end-to-end testing with Jest and Puppeteer. If you like this type of content, please slap that like button and please subscribe because that really helps out my channel. So without any further ado, let's get on with the video. Alright, let's get started. So in this video, as I said before, I'm going to be talking all about end-to-end testing with Jest and Puppeteer. In previous videos, I already talked about unit testing and integration testing. So I'll leave the link to those videos in the description as well as, on the card to your right, probably. So in this video, we're going to be talking about something slightly different from all those. Called end-to-end testing. So I guess the question is, what is end-to-end testing then? So end-to-end testing basically is a technique of testing where we test the entire product to be sure that it behaves how we intend it to behave. Like it could be an entire feature of maybe a chat app, and you want to just test the whole functionality like how a user would have tested it. But in this case, you're using a bot to do the testing, if that makes any sense. So it defines the product system's dependencies and ensures all the integrated pieces of work together as expected. It verifies that if you click a button, certain things appear on the screen, and or certain things disappear from the screen. It's just a way of making a bot to do what a human otherwise would have done. So that's the whole crux of end-to-end testing, and it's really important to do this before you send like a really standard product out there, because there may be some issues you see after you deploy a product that you would have caught if you had used end-to-end testing. That's why it's so important. And a lot of industries have dedicated end-to-end testing engineers to actually do all this for them. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you all the tools you need to be that end-to-end testing engineer. And yeah, let's go on ahead. So how do we do this? So there are many ways of doing this. There are many combinations of testing suites for doing this. But in this video, we'll be focusing on Puppeteer and Jest. But the logic remains the same, right? You're essentially just making a bot to look at pages. If certain things appear on the page or if certain things disappear on the page, you test for all of these eventualities, and this will become much clearer when I continue with the video. So right now we're going to be using Puppeteer, which is a an automation tool created by Google, and then we'll be using Jest as our assertion library to basically do the same comparison that we have been doing for the past two videos before this. Yeah, so there, as I said before, there are other testing suites. There's Truffle, there's Selenium, but in this video we will be focusing on Puppeteer. Now, enough talk, let's get on with the code. So, to get on with the remainder of the video, we will need to download Visual Studio Code, which is just essentially my code editor. In general, you can use any code editor of your choice, but this is what I just use on my own end, and it works really well for me. And this is what a lot of developers use as well for JavaScript development. So you can just go ahead and download this for your operating system. Another important thing you need to do is to go ahead and download Node.js, which is an open source platform that we're going to be using for our Jest and Puppeteer scripts. It's essential to have this. If you don't have this, you may not be able to follow on ahead with the video. So download this and let's get on with the code. So as you can see here, we have already an already existent folder structure. It's not a totally empty project. I will leave my GitHub repository in the description below so that you can essentially get this project and download the project and work with it, right? So what this product has, it has the front end of a particular website that has been built, and I'll show you this front end in a few minutes. I just want to just walk through the structure here. So there's a public folder, and it has some certain functions, and it has the index.html file, which you can go through and make this a little bigger. So let's make it bigger so we can all see clearly. Perfect. So it has like some certain like HTML structures, and it has an index.js file, which controls certain things as well. We don't need to understand this code to really go through the tutorial. This is just the front end website that we are going to be testing, right? So, and I'm going to use something called live server to show you how the front end website looks like. To get live server on Visual Studio Code, you essentially go to this extension icon here, click on it, and then search for live server, right? And then just download this, and then you'll be able to spin up any front end server of your choice. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that here. I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to, you should see an option here called open with live server. So when I click on open with live server, it should open the web page on a server on our local host here. So as you can see, this is the website that we're going to be testing, testing to see whether it actually operates how it should operate for us. So of course, the first thing to do in this situation is to, let me just show you how it works in general. So generally, this is like a sign. You can see this as a sign up, purely front end sign up interface for a user. I can come in here and I can enter a first name. I can write my name, Clement, and I can write the graph, and I can enter my age to be, I'm not 70, but I'll just put 70. Then I can click on submit, and then it should add Clement, the graph, and 70 to the users list. And it should also clear the inputs as well. But if I try to do Clement, right, and I try to submit, I should get two errors. I should get that the last name is required, the age is required. If I enter the age, 43, and submit, I should get only the last name is required. But if I come here and I type in everything, it should add a brand new user, right? So this is essentially how the system works. So we're going to be testing that this system works as planned, and we're going to be testing because if a system is buggy, for example, it may still add a user without the age and without the last name, right? So we need to be sure based on the design that is going to work according to plan. So that's essentially how the front-end system works, and we're going to be testing it with two technologies, Jest and Puppeteer. But before we go into the testing with Puppeteer, I want to just do a brief refresher on how to code the Puppeteer. If you already know how to code the Puppeteer, please skip to the minute on the screen displayed right now. But for those that want to really learn how to use Puppeteer to do this project, then of course you can still stick along. You can still stick along if you're already new Puppeteer. You may learn something new as well. So generally, before I start with Puppeteer, I need to initiate an npm project, right? An npm a package.json. I've already done that here. You can just go ahead and type in npm install, npm init, then just say -y. I have already done this, so I will need to run this again. But this generated my package.json file that you can see over here. Then I can go on ahead and now that I have my package.json file, I can go on ahead and install my dependencies. First of which, of course, is Jest and then Puppeteer. But since I'm going to be discussing Puppeteer first, or I can just install everything, I think. Let me just go ahead and install everything. So I can just say npm install. Then, since these are development dependencies, I'll say --save -dev, right? And I'll say Jest and Puppeteer, if I can spell that well. So here it is. It's downloading them, and when it's done with the download, we will get back to coding. Okay, the installation is done, so let's move ahead to do our little Puppeteer refresher. So I'm going to create a new file here. I'm going to call this file Puppeteer test.js. Just to like, okay, maybe let me call it refresher then. It makes more sense to call it refresher, right? Puppeteer refresher.js. Awesome. So I'm going to show you how to use, in this case, Puppeteer to scrape, to just look for, to automate the process to collect a list of pizza restaurants from Google. So to go on ahead with the little projects, the first thing will be to bring in Puppeteer. Since we want to use it to scrape Google, we just need to bring it in and create a browser to do that, right? So the first step is to do const Puppeteer is equal to require Puppeteer. And then we need to create something called an asynchronous if. And what's an if? It means immediately invoked function expression. So this basically means that immediately this file is run, the function we're going to create below here, like this, is going to be executed immediately, right? So this is a what you likely call an asynchronous if. So the first step to actually scrape Google will be to go to Google, right? And how do we go to Google? We go to Google with a browser. So we can do const browser is equal to, and why are we putting this in an asynchronous function, right? We generally Puppeteer works mostly asynchronously, so we need to use the await keyword like 99% of the time. So we will need to await the creation of a browser by saying Puppeteer dot launch, right, to bring out a Puppeteer, to bring out the browser from Puppeteer. And then there are a couple of options here, but I'm just going to keep this simple, and I'm just say headless should be false. What does this mean? This means that we want to be able to see our browser doing the automation and the clicks and the scrapes operations, right? We want to be able to see this operation. We want to be able to see the browser. If you put in headless true, which is the default value, you won't be able to see the browser bring out this tools, right? Bring out this the browser. I mean to say, you won't be able to see the browser work. I mean to say, so in general, we want to see it as false initially because we are testing Puppeteer. We want to see how it automates and clicks on buttons and types on inputs automatically. So after we create our browser, we want to create our new page, right? So we say const page is equal to await browser dot new page, and then this creates a brand new page, and the next step is to go to the new page, right? So to go to the new page, we say await. Or there are a couple more things we can do before we go to the new page, but I'll add all those as an extra. We want to do a page dot go to, and obviously we want to go to Google, right? HTTPS google.com, if I can type. So at this point, we'll go to google.com and we'll be able to, we'll be able to do our operations on google.com, right? So let me just run this function and pop just to see how we go and where we go. And then when it's done, I want to just console.log done with automation, right? So how do I run this file? Obviously, I run like every other Node.js file by saying node Puppeteer underscore refresher, or whatever you name the file. No need to add the .js. By pressing the enter button, it should bring out a browser. And then I go to google.com with a browser. Perfect. So it says done with automation, which is what we're done. So the browser stays here, and we can do a couple more investigations and whatnot. So generally, web scraping is about investigations, investigating the problem, investigating what to click, what to press, and whatnot, right? So in this instance, to sort of search for something on Google without typing anything, the first step, of course, will be to see the selector of this said input, right? We need to know this input and what we are, how we can identify the input. And this is where our knowledge of CSS and selectors comes to play, right? So obviously, to do this, we need to inspect to see what we are looking for on the input, because we want to look for pizzas, right? Pizza restaurants, right? So the first step is to right click on this and say, oh, how do I identify this said input? I know I can identify the input by looking at this certain selector here, and we can see that it has a title of search as a selector. It has other attributes here, of course, but this is the easiest and what I'm sure will be the most consistent over the years to select this inputs selector by, right? To select this input by. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to create a variable here and say const search. I'll call this search selector is equal to this. And this is how I will do it in CSS. I'll put this between square brackets and then type in the attribute. This is generally how I will select the title, an attribute that has title of search, right? A tag that has the attributes, I mean to say, title search. I can make this more, of course, more targeted by saying this is actually an input that has a title of search as an attribute, right? So now that I've mapped out the attributes I want to use to type, the logical thing to do will be to, type on it then. So, but before I start typing on this, I want to be able to be sure that the page, the input actually is there, because Google takes time to load their pages, right? Every website takes some time to load. So the Puppeteer bot needs to be able to know that it's actually visible on the page. That's this the input is actually visible on the page. So what we do in this instance is to say await page dot, in this case, wait for selector. So we need to be sure that the search selector is there. So we put in between here the search selector. So what happens here is it waits as long as it needs to wait for the search selector to be available, and then when it's available, it moves on to line 21 here. It moves on to line 21 because it's seeing the search selector. And in that case, we can do whatever we want to do with that. So what do? We can do a click on it. We can say await page.click on the selector. You can say, and this takes in two major arguments. The first argument, of course, is the selector you want to click on, which is the input in this instance. So we do a search selector. And the second argument are options. So we can see we have like a click count, for example, if it's a double click you want to do, or a triple click or whatever. But these are not really necessary. But I may just put this as a default value of 1 or something, right? So it doesn't really matter. It can be 2, it can be 3. You can also type on the input, of course, by saying await page. That's type. And in this instance, what do we want to type? We want to type pizza restaurants, right? So the first argument, of course, is a selector as usual, which is the search selector, and then the next thing to do is to say pizza. If I can spell restaurants, perfect. So now notice we're using the await keyword in every single line, because every single one of these actions takes some time, and JavaScript needs to know that the previous command is done before it continues with the next command, or it will mess things up, because JavaScript needs to be able to wait for this action to complete, then move on to the next line. So the next thing I want to do, just to recap, we created a page, waiting for the selector to appear on the screen. Click on that selector, this is not very necessary, but just to show you that you can click on stuff, and then we typed into that selector, right? So the next thing to do, of course, is we want to press the enter button to show that, oh, we are actually searching. We actually want to search for the pizza restaurants, right? So we just say await. In this case, yet again, await page, and want to press the enter button. So to have access to the enter button, we need to say dot keyboard, right? Dot press. So we're actually pressing a button on the keyboard, right? So you can see how powerful Puppeteer can really be. So this then has like different buttons you can enter. You can put in A, B, C, D, but it was one button at a time. We can't have multiple buttons here, to the best of my knowledge. So in this case, it's just the enter button you press, right? So the press enter, right? So yeah, effectively, this actually does search for the pizza restaurants, and then we can, scrape them if we need to scrape them, of course. So why I'm teaching all these things, it will make more sense when we move on um, to the end-to-end testing, so that we can actually better be able to track certain things, to scrape certain things, to click, to press certain buttons. So that's why I'm doing this little mini project before we go into the main project, right? So uh, let's just see if this runs, right? Let's run this again. Let's do node puppeteer underscore refresher again, and let's see if we can actually search for pizza restaurants. So it did that really quickly. We didn't really see much of it because it's on super speed, but we did search for pizza restaurants, right? Perfect. To make this more, visible to us, there's another option on the puppeteer.launch method called slow mo, and we can take this to as high a number as I want to, but a generally sweet spot where I tend to be able to see operations in the test mode is slow mo of 70. I can be able to see what the bot is doing in real time, right? So if I just cancel this process and restart the process yet again, I can see that it goes to the page, then it types. You can see it's typing ever so slowly and pressing the enter button ever so slowly, and then we have our pizza places, right? Awesome. So the next step, of course, is to scrape the pizza places, right? So how do we scrape the pizza places? What do we do to actually scrape these pizza places? It's not such a difficult task, but you need to be tactful about it. What do you actually want from the pizza place? Do you want the name? Do you want the location? Do you want I don't know, the stars? In this case, I'm going to keep it very simple. I only want the name, so I'm going to just right click on this first title here just to see the selector I get. Sometimes I need to right click and inspect again sometimes. So yes, so I can see that I have a couple of selectors here, but most times when I see random numbers like this, I tend to have less confidence in them that they'll stay still for several years to come. But when I move up, I'm able to see that I do get this how do I put this, I do see something that seems less random. RLLT details, right? um I can, of course, search for only I can actually get all the details all together. It doesn't really matter. But if I want to get the title of this alone, I know that I need to search for a div that has the class of our LLT details, because I'm fairly confident that this is going to be all the same all around the board. Just to verify that, I'm going to right click and inspect on this, and I can see that I also have RLLT underscore details for the second result and the third result as well. Of course, this is just a test. I'm just going to get these three results because there are only three results here. There are obviously better ways of scraping pizzas, but the point is I want to show you guys actually how to scrape from a page. So the first thing I'll do is I'll look for IRLT details, and I'm going to scrape for all the spans, the contents of the spans inside of the RLLT underscore details, and I need to stop saying that word. So let's go on ahead to do that. So of course we need to be able to wait for a selector, right? So the first step of what I'll do is I'll come just to the top. I'm gonna come here. I usually like to define all my variables in one place when I do my automation tasks. So I'm not gonna come here and say const restaurant selector is equal to, in this case, is RLLT underscore details. If I have that one right, But since I'm selecting the class, I need to do a dot, just like I'll do with CSS. So, and I want to select all the spans inside of this. So I'm going to use RILT details and span. So what I'm going to do next is after I press enter, I need to be able to be sure or that the restaurants are showing on the page after I press enter. So I have to wait for them. So I'm going to say await again, page dot wait for selector, right? And in this case, I'm waiting for the restaurant selector, right? Makes sense. So once the selector shows on the page, then we can go ahead and scrape. So how do we do this scraping? There are many ways to go about it, but generally I like to use the page.evaluate method, right? So I say const. In this case, what I want to get, I want to get something from the page. I want to get all the contents of IRLT details and span. So I'll say, as I said before, page.evaluate, and of course I have to await this. And page.evaluate is a method, right, that takes in an anonymous function, or it can be a named function if you want to export this function somewhere, and it takes in an argument of what you want to be passed into the argument of the function. Let me explain. If I pass in a restaurant selector here, restaurant selector will be the argument here of this function in the first argument of page.evaluate. But if I don't pass in restaurant selector in here, because this anonymous function is in a different context, this anonymous function here is actually in a very different context. It's in the context of the front end of the page. We are not able to access restaurant selector, which is this variable, from inside of this anonymous function here in the first argument of page.evaluate. That is why we need to put that in the second argument of page.evaluate, because any single item that is here, be it a string, an object literal, or a number, or whatever type, finds its way passed into the first argument of the anonymous function of page.evaluate, right? So this might take a while to fully understand, but I hope once you play the video, replay what I said again, it'll make much more sense. So I'll put this in here, or I can call this any other thing. I can just call this rs, since it's the same thing. What I pass here is what is going to be passed in this anonymous function. So this keeps things orderly, and I don't need to keep on saying const selector again and start defining stuff. It keeps all my variable definitions orderly, and I can have them all here in my variables section here. So of course I need to be able to know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the titles, which is inside of this selector, right? So I'll just say const restaurants in this case, or let me say restaurant titles is equal to, then I have access to my DOM in this argument. I have access to my DOM, so I can say document dot query selector all in this instance, and then I'm going to pass in my restaurants, my rs in this case, since I named rs different from restaurant selector. Again, just to reiterate, restaurant selector in line 37 is passed into the argument of the anonymous function in line 35. Therefore, we have access to it in this context, and we also have access to the document object model, the DOM, and we can make certain DOM-like functions work here as well. So now that we have all our restaurant titles, we want to get all the titles. This is just the span tag. This gives us the span tag. So I just call this title span tag. I want to get the text from the span tags, right? So I'll just say const restaurants titles, right? In this case, so this is equal to, and I have to spread this to turn it into a real array, because right now it doesn't return a real array. This returns a a node list, which is not a real array. So I have to spread it by using the spread operator here to convert it to a real array. And then I want to map it because I then have this map method available to me because I've converted it to a real array. And then every item here has an element, right? Since it's now an array of elements, no longer a node list of elements, it's an array of elements. And for every span element here, I want to return the text content. So this will give me a list. This will give me a list of titles in text format, right? So after doing that, the next thing I want to do is I want to return my restaurant titles. And how do I retrieve this from outside of this DOM, DOM? When I say DOM, I mean DOM, DOM, document object model. How do I extract restaurant titles that I've designed here out of this context? I need to save this in a variable called I don't know, restaurant titles maybe, or titles. Let me call this. I'm naming it differently so you can see that they are all different things. So when I return restaurant titles, it's gonna save this array that has been gotten out of here from this map method into this titles variable, and then we have access to it. So all I'm just gonna do is I'm gonna just log it out and say console.log titles. So that should be it. So let's just go ahead and try to try to run this automation again and see the results we get. And if we get an error, it's not a problem. We can easily debug stuff to know that some things are not working according to plan. So run this again. Node Puppeteer refresher. It goes to Google, it types in pizza restaurants, and then it should, yes, we're done with the operation. But then we have an issue, which I suspect we'll have. Right now, we're not only getting the title, we're getting every single thing that's in the span tag, which is weird. So I think what I'll do in this instance, I'm going to try this. I'm going to say, instead of getting all the span tags that are under RL details, I want to see if this will work. I haven't tried this yet, so I'm just going to do something like this and say uses greater than sign, which means get the first immediate child of this div here. So let's see if this works. If this doesn't work, there are other ways to do it, but I'm kind of confident that it'll work. So let me run this again. It should get only the first span, which is the title of the restaurant. Oh, we haven't gotten anything yet. I wonder why. Maybe there's an error. Let me see. There's no error. That's odd. Give me a few seconds to debug this. It must be something really small. Perhaps this doesn't work then. So I guess what I'll do in this instance, of course, the error happened here. It finally got an error. It couldn't find greater than span. So this is where the error occurred. And I'm glad we're having these errors because it's easy to get errors in this instance. So we waited for the selector. It did not find the selector, and then it's failed. So it's line 30 that failed for us. So I guess what we'll do in this instance is I'll look for the span, and then I'll just leave it like this. But what I'll do is I will give me a second to look at this. I'll be right back. Okay, so I believe I've seen what the issue was. I generally in these situations you need to be more specific with your targeting, right? You can't just say something like this when there are multiple spans, right? So I realized that looking at investigating it again, I realized that there's a more direct way to investigate this, to target this, which is RLLT details, which contains a div with an attribute of role equal to heading, which has a span. So that way I'm able to target that this has that this has only 3 results here, as you can see. So this is sometimes what I do to just try to get a more targeted selection of certain elements on the page. So I added a role of heading and I was able to get the titles here. So let me just run that function once again. Sorry for the break in transmission. So I'm going to run node refresher yet again, and let's see what we get. Hopefully we get a good result. Awesome. So we get Pizza Jungle GRA, and Riley's Pizzas and Burgers. Perfect. So I guess that's it for our refresher. So generally, just to refresh the refresher, we went to google.com by using the page to go to. Then we just set our selectors here, which we needed to be more specific with line 20, the selector here, to get only the titles, and we can be just as specific to get any other item on the page. So we waited for the selectors, we clicked, we typed, we pressed enter to search, we waited for the restaurant selector to be live, and then we used the patient evaluate function to enter into our DOM model, right? And then we were able to extract in an array of the titles of the restaurants, and then we're done with the automation. Perfect. So we can move on to the next part of this video, which is actually trying to automate this page, right? So let's move on with that. So the first step, of course, is we need to have Jest installed, right? We need to have Jest installed, which we already do, I believe. Yeah, we have Jest installed here. So the next step, of course, is to work on our test script, because without our test scripts, we won't be able to run our Jest function. So under the scripts here, there's usually some default junk that is put here by the npm init command. So we just clear this off, and then we just put in Jest. So putting in Jest here, if we run npm run test, we're able to get what Jest does. It looks for any folder, any file that has a .test.js or a .spec.js, right? So we don't have any testing file here yet, so we are going to create just that. So the first thing I'll do, of course, is I will create a folder here, right, to put all our testing suits. I'll call this folder tests, simple as that. And then I'll name a file here. I'll say users creation .test.js. I can call this .spec.js, as I said before, but just to keep things nice and uniform, I just call it .test.js, right? Awesome. So we have our test file. So let's try and keep things a little simple. Just a little refresh on how to write tests, which I already covered the majority of this in the previous video. I don't think I need to talk too much about certain things again. Just go watch my previous videos on Jest tests, but just to create like an outline of things that I'll need to do. The first thing I'll need to do, of course, is to say, just to write a simple test to be sure that our connection is done properly. So I have describe here, and then the first argument takes in what are we describing, what is this particular test suit's going to do. So I'll just say, just to be sure our wires are properly connected, and then inside of this function I'm just going to write a very, very bare bones simple test, and I'll just say testing that 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. And the second argument is, of course, the anonymous function where we run that test of 1 plus 1 equal to 2. So what we just do in this instance is we then say expect 1 plus 1 to be 2. Awesome. So again, to be is used to test primitive types, and to equal used to test reference types, which I said a lot of that in the previous video. So let me just run npm run test and cross your fingers. Awesome. So we have one test that passed, one test into the passed, and one test that passed. And the first you can see here, we can see just to be sure our wires are properly connected. Testing that 1 + 1 = 2. Perfect. So we're just gonna clear this previous test and then start on with the actual project. So I want to test this page. I want to test for a couple of things, right? Before we go on and start typing some code. I want to test that when I enter my name and my details, how will I put this? I want to test when I enter my name and my details and everything. I should be able to get a new user here. Just type in some gibberish here. I should be able to get the first name, the last name, and the age, right? I also want to test for when I have a totally empty input. I want to be sure I have these 3 errors here. And if I have a partially empty input by saying deba, for example, and it clicks submit, I want to be sure that I get only 2 errors here, right? I can be as specific as I want with these errors, of course, but just to keep things simple, I'm going to give you the tools to be able to do more rigorous testing on this. So just to go ahead and create this whole system, the first thing I want to do to be able to achieve this, I'm going to use a lot of the things that we learned from our little Puppeteer refresher here. So the first step, of course, is to bring in Puppeteer. Yeah. Perfect. And then I want to do some certain things, right? Since we're going to be running the same multiple tests with Puppeteer, so on multiple testing suites, right? What I want to do is I want to say, I want to define certain things. I'm going to define a page and the browser, or maybe let me say the browser then the page, and they're going to be undefined, of course, because I want to define them later. So I use the let keywords to do that. Then the URL, I want to have like the URL of the page defined on the root of the page, of course. So I'm going to come here. Let me just copy this real quick and paste it here. Perfect. So I have the URL of the page. What else do I need? Then I need something called timeout, because some of these tests will run for quite a long time because, of course, they are end-to-end tests. End-to-end tests often take more time to run than integration or unit tests. So we're just gonna have to set a timeout value for some of these tests, right? So yeah, in the beginning of this video, I think I walked through some of the functions that make up this page. We're gonna be doing some more functions on this to be sure just to test certain things. But before we do that, I want to write some other functions. I'm gonna write a function called delay before I start my actual testing. So this delay function, it's just you don't have to know too much of what it does. It just helps delay for us to wait for certain things to be on the page first before we do certain operations. So I'm just gonna say this just returns a new promise, and then resolves. It's a resolve parameter, of course, and then this sets timeouts, and then it finally resolves. Done, right? So this generally what this does is it takes in the milliseconds that we want to wait for, and then it waits for them in an await with the await keyword. This will make more sense. So basically, it creates a new promise so that we can await it, and then in that new promise is a set timeout, and when the set timeout is done, we resolve done. Hence, we have successfully waited for this millisecond time. We're going to make use of this very soon, so we'll just keep this at bay. We're going to write one more function, but we're not going to write that function quite yet. So now let's do something, right? Let's start our use of Puppeteer. So the first thing we want to do is create our browser. And what do we do first before any test? When we want to do something before any test, what do we first do? We probably know the answer to this from the previous video. So we have a before all function here, right? So before all function that takes in an anonymous function here, and then since we want to use Puppeteer, that is 99% asynchronous, we need to put async here. So what we want to do in this instance is we want to say browser, which we have already defined, is equal to await puppeteer dot launch, right? And it's going to launch a head full or headless. It's going to have the headless option that is false, of course. And then I want to have a slow mo in this instance just for test of 70, because we would need to be able to see what is going on so that we can properly be sure that we are doing the right sort of tests and stuff. So what this does is before every single testing suite runs, we are initializing our browser, which is the whole purpose of the before all. And then we also want to, in this same function, in the same callback function, initialize our page by using the await keyword as well. Browser dot new page. Perfect. And also in the same vein, we want to also go to the URL that we want to do the testing in, which we have defined above as URL here. Perfect. So our before all function is more or less complete. So the next step, of course, is to start our test. Okay guys, Future Clement here. Before we move on to write our tests, there's the very important function that we should write after before all, which is after all. What this does is it actually closes our browsers when all their tests are done. It closes the browser when all the tests are done to prevent a memory leak, a message which you'll be seeing quite often at the end of this video. But at the end, I do write the after all function, but I think it's in your best interest to write the after all function now so that it closes the browser every time a test is complete, unlike what you will see at the continuance of this video. So I just wanted to just put that out there just to tell you guys to write this first. So Future Clement out. So generally, when I do my tests, I usually test for errors first, right? I expect to have a couple of errors on the page tested. Then when I'm sure the errors occur when the errors should occur, then I want to test for a success, right? So how do I do that? So obviously I need to use the describe keyword yet again, and then this testing suite is just called testing user creation functionality. And of course, in the real website, you're going to have multiple testing suites, but in this case, we're just going to have one because it's just literally only one function. So we're just going to have one testing user creation functionality testing suite, right? And then under this, I want to, before I start writing some tests, I want to get some variables here, right? So just like we did in our Puppeteer refresher class, I want to be able to get all of these input selectors and the button selector and a couple other selectors, right? And an error occurs, I want to be able to get the error selector as well. So just a couple of things I want to sort of like define out here. Yeah. So I guess the first step is, let me just inspect this. Not a mobile mode. So I can see that the input has an ID of first name. So I'll just say, when I'm declaring my variable, I'll just use this ID of first name. I'll say const first name selector is equal to, and I'm gonna just do this like the CSS selector, which is what it is. This will be first underscore name, and last name selector, of course, will be, check this well, and just right click and inspect. This will be underscore last name, as we've seen here, underscore last name. So I'm not gonna keep on doing the same thing. Obviously this code is gonna be in the description below. I'm just gonna quickly write out all the selectors that will be needed for this. So I'll just say Okay, so now I've written all the selectors. This is the H selector, of course, is the button selector to click on this submit button here, and this is the error selector. Is in a dot error div, and it has an li, right? So that's how it works. So I want to test that at least the page, to be sure that I'm actually on the page, this actual page. I want to be sure that the page has a title of, as you can see here, if you go to the HTML file real quickly, the page title is awesome website. So I want to test to see if I'm actually on this page and if my other tests should even continue. So that's the first step. So how I test if I'm on the page? First of all, I'll use my test, my test function, which is provided to us by Jest, and then I'll just say page should have the correct title, right? So what's the page title in this instance? Let me just define it here as well, since I'm defining stuff at the top. Page title. This is awesome website. And then what I'll do in this instance is I should say const title. How do I get the page title with Puppeteer? Well, that is easy. Since I already have my page defined and everything working well, since this function already runs before all function already runs before every other function here, I'll be sure that my page will not be undefined, of course, and I will get my page here. So to get my page title, of course, I need to be sure that I have my await keyword here, and in that regard, I need to be sure I have my async added on here so that I can be able to use my await keyword and await page dot. In this instance, is as simple as saying page dot title, right? This gives me the title of my page, and then I can use the expect function provided to us by Jest and expect the title to be, since this is going to give us a string, and gives a string value, right? And I expect this to be awesome website, right? So if I save this, I expect this, at least this first test, to pass totally. Let's just cross our fingers and hope that that is the case. So let me run npm run test. Let's see. Awesome. So you can see that we have a test suits, one passed, right? And which one passed? The page should have the correct title. Awesome. And of course, if we make the page not have the correct title by adding like maybe an exclamation mark like this, and we run the test, we'll see that we get one failed, right? One failed value here. And don't worry about this green warning here. This is probably because of the fact that we are using a slow-mo here, making things a little slower than Jest would like. But when we're done with our entire system, we can run this on hyperspeed, and Jest won't have this issue with us. So as you can see, we have like a failed comparison. It's telling us that it expected to receive an exclamation mark here, and it received no exclamation mark. So we're sure that our test is working according to plan. And so we don't keep on needing to cancel and restart the test process, because that is pretty annoying. We can add another watch tag here, underscore watch, if I remember correctly. If this doesn't work, then I'll have to do the research on it. Run test. Watch all. Oh, it's watch all, not watch. Okay. Watch all. So I'll run test. Awesome. So it's watching, right? So every time I reload my page, it will, every time I reload my test page, it should rerun this test again for me without needing to start and stop the process, right? Perfect. So what other tests do I need to run so this video doesn't take extremely long? The other test I need to run is I want to check whether it should actually throw an error, right, if all the inputs are left empty. Meaning if I do something like this, let's submit like this, it should throw an error. There's 3 errors to be exact if the inputs are left empty. So how do I test for that? How am I sure it's going? How do I run this test? Right. So the first step, of course, is to write a testing function like this. And then I want to say, okay, should throw 3 errors if no input has been filled, right? And then, of course, we want this to be asynchronous, of course. And then, so the first one we want to do in this instance is to say, we want to wait to be sure that we have the item on the page. It's always safer to wait before you do any automation process. Wait for that selector, at least the first selector on the page. We should just wait for it to appear first. So you can see await page.wait for selector. If I can spell. And what selector am I waiting for exactly? I'm waiting for the first name selector, because that's the first thing that should appear on the page, right? When it's painting the page. So I want to click on the button selector without filling anything. I just want to click on the button selector, just like I clicked on it just now, right? So I want to say await page dot click, and then this should be button selector, right? So when I click on this button selector, I expect to receive some errors, right? So the first error. So how am I sure I receive any error? I use page.evaluate. What I showed you guys in the little Puppeteer refresher class we had a few minutes ago. So I can come in here and I can say const errors received, because I want to be able to get to these errors, and await page.evaluate. And then obviously I'm going to have a function here that says get errors, but to keep things neat, because I'm going to be using get errors quite a lot, I'm going to turn it into a function, right, called get errors. And then the error, I need to pass in some error elements, of course, which of course is this line 34, error elements, right? So basically, these error elements are like my error selectors. I think error selectors is the better name for it. Error selectors, right? So let me just change this real quick, because it's if you look at it, if you like right click and inspect, maybe inspect again, you can see that it has an error on ordered list with error with the regular LIs here. So we are sure that the error LI are the error selectors. So again, we need to define this get errors function. And how do we do that? How do we write the get errors function? How do we get these errors, knowing fully well that the errors are going to be in .error.li? So what we do is, I'm just going to go ahead above here, and under this delay function, I'll create a brand new function called, what I called it here, get errors at the top. So this get errors, I'm going to, it's going to have an argument called error elements. And why will it have error elements? Or why will it have error selectors? Let me say. It will have error selector because, as I said before, I passed the error selector here as a second argument. So whatever I pass here as a second argument of page.evaluate becomes the first argument of get errors. This is why I made that little helper refresher yet again, to refresh your memory with Puppeteer and all those stuff. Awesome. So how do we then get our errors, if the errors do exist, right? We get errors by just doing a const error list. So we want to get all the error elements if they exist, right, on the page. I'll say document, of course, dot query selector all, since at this point in time we have access to the DOM elements in the page.evaluate function. So we want to look for all the error selectors if they exist on the page, and if the error list length is greater than 0, we want to then return. The first thing we want to do is we want to first of all convert this to an actual array, because this doesn't give us an array. This query selector all doesn't give us an array. It gives us a node list. So spreading it like this gives us an array. So we do a .map function and have our error here, our actual error element here. And then what do we want to get from the error element? We want to get the text content from the error element, which are all these first name required, last name required, blah, 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 over here on the DOM here. So I'm going to say error.text content. So it's going to return a list of all the text of errors. That's what this get error function does. And if there are no errors on the screen, we want to return just a regular empty array, which is not a node list, an empty array. So perfect, that should work according to plan. We should be able to receive the errors at least. So how do we check on whether or not we have a passed test? We actually have all three errors there. We use the expect keyword, of course, and we say errors received. So we expect the errors received, in this case not to be, but to equal a primitive type array, which has first name is required, last name is required, and finally age is required. So in theory, all these should work according to plan. We should be able to get first name is required, last name is required, age is required, equal to all the errors we receive if there is no input entered at all. So let's try this and let's cross our fingers. So it's going to run the function again, open the browser, try to tap and try to check whether it throws all three errors, and thankfully they all passed. We can see that we have one test suite that passed and we have all two that passed, right? And which ones actually passed? Page has the correct title, passed. Should throw three errors if no input has been filled, passed as well, which is perfect. So now that that is all done, to be very sure it passed, let me make a little typo here that says required whatever gibberish, and let me save this. Let me see, it's probably going to fail now, which it does. As you can see here, it said the part that failed is this array. It should have been required, but it should have been required whatever and we got first name is required instead. So we are sure that our test actually ran perfectly and we got everything we needed. Perfect. So we have our test passing for this one. So we can write more tests to this, of course. We can test whether only two errors showed up, for example, right? So I'm just going to copy. Okay, do I copy? I don't think there's any need to copy. I'm just write a quick test. Should only show two errors, right? Which are last name and age, right? It should only show these two errors. So what I'll do in this instance, knowing fully well that we don't need to wait for any selector again because we're already on the same screen, we can just say await page.type. I just want to type into the first name selector, right? First name selector, and what do I want to type? I want to type in my name. I'll type in Clement, right? And after I type in Clement, I'm going to click on the submit button. So I'm just going to copy line 55 and line 56 because they're going to be the same thing here, and paste it over here. So I'm going to click on the button here and I'm going to look for the errors here. So I expect to receive a couple of errors. I want to be able to one second. Yeah. I don't, to be honest, okay. I'll leave it. I was gonna say I don't need the delay function, but I think I need it in the future. And of course, this should have the async flag on it, or this whole function will fail. So I expect to receive I expect the errors I receive to be, in this case, to equal, what should they equal? They should be equal to an array that has last name is required and one that has age is required. So if I save this and I see, hopefully it won't fail, but I think it should quite work according to plan. Yes, all 3 tests passed. Perfect. So I guess the final test I want to sort of write is I want to sort of write the test for a success, right? To be sure that everything is successful and I actually do get the successful additions. This is a bit of a longer function, but it's still the same principles that we follow at the end of the day, right? So I'm gonna write a test, right, that has, says successfully added a user, right? Simple title. And this is gonna be an asynchronous function as well. We're very close to the end now. So of course we have let's see what we have when we actually do add a user, right? So I'm just gonna come here. I'm gonna say Clement the Graphe, and I'm gonna enter an age of 38. Click on submit. So I can see that the first name here is Clement the Graphe 38. So what do we want to do? How are we sure that our user has been added successfully? We need to check that we actually have this an item here in this selector in the names paragraph tag, and they should both be Clement and the Graphe. And we need to be sure that we have an age item tag here, an age item p tag here that actually has an age inside of it. So we're going to check for a list card, right, that have names and age item, right? So it's gonna be inside of the user list div, of course. So user list div that has an ordered list with names and age items that have Clement the Graphe and 38. Perfect. So let us do this. The first step, of course, is to get our selectors. I haven't actually added the selectors. I just remembered. I didn't even use the page title. I just realized. Oops. Add that one here. That's weird. I didn't use the page title. What else didn't I use? Last name selector. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to add 2 new selectors here. I'm going to call this since I didn't use. Okay, I'm still going to use this too anyway. So what I'll just do is I'll just say const user selector, which is this p tag of names. User selector is equal to dot user list, which is this user list here, which is inside of an ordered list and is inside of the names p tag. I can do p.names or names, doesn't really matter. And then I also want the age item selector, age, which is different from the age input selector. Maybe I should make this more specific, which is different from the age input selector. So it's going to be an age item selector, which is equal to the user list ql.age item, right? Which is this one, of course. That goes without saying. So, which is the age, the 38 here. I mean to say, in case you can see my cursor. So, going ahead, what do I want to do? I want to type into all of the selectors. I already know that we've typed at this point in time, since we have not cleared any of the inputs, we have already typed into the first name selector here, if we recall, in line 65. So I'm just going to go ahead and type into other selectors, right? I'm going to say await page.type into other selectors. I'll call this last name selector. I'm going to type in the Graphe, and I'm going to say await page the type age selector, age input selector, and I want to type in the age. I'm not sure I typed in my age yet, so I'm just going to put in any string to age of I don't know, 54. That's not my real age, but let's go with that. uh, then of course I want to submit the I'm going to submit the user. I'm going to say page.click on the submit selector, which is the button selector, right? And then I'm going to delay for a little bit. I'm going to use the delay function to delay for a little bit, maybe for like a second or so. This is how we use the delay function. Remember, delay function takes in the millisecond time, and then it returns a new promise, which then waits for the set timeouts set by the millisecond time you passed in into the argument. And then once it resolves, it moves on to the next line for JavaScript to process the next lines, right? So once we wait for like a second or so, we need to check whether we receive any errors. So we need, again, copy this line 67. This is why we created this get error function. We need to copy line 67 to check whether there are any errors, right? And then we expect, this is the first test, the very first test. We expect the errors received, right, dot to equal to an empty array. Let's test this. Let's test that this first part actually works. So I'm gonna run a test suits, blah blah. Do that. Do that. Yeah, 4 tests passed. So all the 4 tests passed. Line 80 ran probably, and we got, you know, that it's equal to an empty array. But we want to do just more than this. We want to be sure that both the user selector have the actual test contents that we need, right? We can get, so we want to be able to get all of the ages and all of the users and be sure that they are contained in all of this, right? So be sure that they are actually equal to this, the graph A 54 and the other one, the Clement one, right? So to do that, to be sure that we actually get the results back, we're going to use our good old friend page.evaluate yet again. So I'm going to say await page.evaluate, and of course this takes in the anonymous function, right? And then we also need to take in a couple other stuff. Let me see. Yeah, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in the 2 selectors here that I defined at the top. This user selector and age item selector. I'm going to pass it as the second parameter here, but it's going to be, instead of just a regular item, it's going to be an object. So it's going to have a user selector, and it's going to have an age item selector, if I'm correct with both of those. Perfect. So I'm going to pass in an object that has these 2 things as the key value pairs. And obviously I'm going to receive this as an argument. I'm going to destructure this after I receive it as an argument. So I'm going to just quickly destructure it, or maybe make things a little less complicated to people not really fully conversant with JavaScript. I'm just going to call this selectors, and then I'm going to say const. I'm going to structure them here, right? And I'm going to say this is the user selector and the age item selector. Perfect. So we have destructured our selectors. We brought them into the second argument of page.evaluate, and then we put them into this argument, right? So in general, we then want to be able to be sure that the text contents of each of these items in the selectors, the text content of each of these, are actually the text content that we entered into this system here. So how do we do that? So the first step, of course, let's see if we get all the ages that were entered into the array. Now that we have only 54, but we can add multiple ages, we can add multiple data, I mean to say, right? So this is in brand new data. So I want to test whether every single thing I've entered into this page is going to be the same, is going to be the exact same thing as this is the graph A 54 or whatever. So basically what I put in is what I got out displayed on the page. That's all I'm trying to test. So enough talk. So let me get all ages. The first age, of course, is gonna be, of course, I need to say document dot query selector all, right? And I want to query all age item selectors, and they can be multiple on the page, right? In this case, we have 2 age item selectors, right? They can be multiple on the page. So I want to get 1 age item selector, and then I want to do more than this. This is going to give us a node list, right? I want to convert it into an array, and yet again, I'll use our friendly neighborhood spread operator, right, to convert this into an array. And then I want to map this array to actually get the text content, as I've been doing all this while. So I'll just say, for this, I'll say element, and then I want to get the element dot text content, because this will give me all the ages on screen currently, all the ages on screen currently. If it's only 1 age, I'll get only 1 age in an array. So I'm going to do the same thing for all users. So I'll say const all users. So since this is going to be essentially like the same thing, I'm just going to copy this and paste it here. What happened? I'm going to copy this line here. Copy and paste. And instead of age item selector, I'm going to say user selector, right? User selector. Perfect. So after I get all my ages and all my users, I'm going to then return a map which has all my ages, right, and all my users. And to receive this returned map, I need to save this result of age.page.evaluate into a function, and I'll just call this into a variable. I mean to say, why did I say function? I want to save the result of page.evaluate into a variable called user data, and then that will be that. And I can then use Jest to evaluate the results of user data. And how do I use Jest to evaluate these results? Of course, I can use the expect keywords, right? And I expect user data to, of course, to equal, since I'm comparing reference types, all ages, right? I should get all ages. That's an array of, in this case, I think I wrote 54. So if we had multiple ages here, and we could write a test to write multiple ages as well, we'll get our multiple ages here in whatever age bracket or whatever age we typed in to our test. But since we have only 1 age here for this test, to keep things simple, I'm looking for that 1 age, and all users in this case should be Clement the Graphe, I believe. So we should, if this passes, this simply means that, okay, all our ages are in this order. There are 54, and there's no other age left. And then there is Clement the Graphe, and there's no other name left, right? So if I save this, let's see how it runs the function for us. Hopefully it doesn't take too much time. Yes, all our tests passed, and of course we're seeing that it's taken a lot of time here. And you can see here it actually did create Clement the Graphe here. So I can go ahead and change this from Clement the Graphe to Clement Justin or something, and change 54 to 89 to be sure that our tests are going to work. And of course I have to change that here to Clement Justin. This is why I keep variables, to make things much easier, but it's just for a short illustration. So I have 89 Clement Justin. Let's see if this works as well. So we have a new page. It tests for failures. Then it tests for success. And you can see that our test passed. Everything passed. To be sure that it actually did pass, if I do Clement Jesse or whatever, and I save this, I should expect this to fail, of course. And it did just that. It just failed because it's not equal to Clement Jesse. It's expected Clement Justin, and you give it Clement Jesse to it expected Clement Jesse, and it's actually received Clement Justin, right? So just take this back to Clement Justin, and then we are sure that our tests are going to pass. Perfect. Of course, we can run this in a headless mode. Headless true and save. See that it doesn't spin up a new browser. This is an old one. Yes, so it passed without even showing the browser. Let me cancel this. This is not the browser it's working with. Let me cancel this. Wow, there are a lot of instances. So that's basically because we haven't ended the process yet. So if we end the process, all the, I believe, okay, the browsers are not going yet. Oh, I may have to delete all the browsers then. Okay, now I've deleted all the browsers. Let me just do an npm run test. And then it should run without even showing any browser at all. Perfect. So all the tests is run, but I want to remove the slow-mo and see if it's going to work without the slow-mo as well. Everything ran as well. Perfect. So another thing I want to do, because it's going to be leaving some leaks, which is a problem, is I want to write another final function to all of this, which is an after all function, so that it closes the browser immediately we're done. And to be sure that that's working, I want to set headless to false, of course, and write an after all function, right? And after all, I want to say it's going to be an async function, of course. And then at the end of this after all function, I want to say await browser dot close. So it closes the browser when it's done. So if I save this and I run the test again, since I made it show browsers, so it does all that and it closes like really quickly, like really quickly. And then you see that message of memory leaks have gone because I am actually closing the browser now. So it's important that you close the browser after all, right? So yeah, that's pretty much it with this tutorial. This is just the general knowledge of end-to-end testing in all its glory. So I hope I've been able to fully explain all you need to know about end-to-end testing, and you can apply it to your projects. Feel free to leave comments below to this effect, and I'll see you guys in another video. If you like this content, please subscribe, please slap that like button, and then more content will be on the way very soon. Thank you.